Welcome back to another Emii Creations video, and this time we are going over how to get into Artist Alley and or Exhibitor Hall for conventions. So for those who are not familiar, my name is Emily and I run a small product-based business called Emii Creations where I sell merchandise of my own art. And I started attending conventions in Artist Alley and Exhibitor Hall since 2017. And I usually go to shows like Fanime, WonderCon, Anime Expo, and Otakon. I'm hoping this video will help aspiring artists interested in getting to conventions a little easier because that was definitely one of the biggest hurdles when I started. So first of all, let's go over the differences between Artist Alley and Exhibitor Hall. I've done both personally, and it's definitely up to how much money you have and what your art entails. So Artist Alley usually consists of a smaller space, one table, maybe two chairs, and they are often more strict and have more regulations about what you are showing at the convention. So some examples are they do not allow proxying, and proxy just means you have to be there selling your own work. So no third person selling your products for you, no reselling, that kind of thing. Another popular regulation is having regulations about merchandise versus art prints. Printed art is usually prints, greeting cards, maybe postcards, stickers usually fall in that category as well. So if you don't have a lot of print merchandise, some artist alleys might not be for you. Some artist alleys require you to only have maybe 20% that is merchandise, and merchandise could be pins, notebooks, keychains, lanyards, that kind of thing. Despite all this, it's very appealing because it's much less expensive than exhibitors. So going rates are usually $100 to $600. Exhibitor, on the other hand, is usually a bigger space. They start by 10 by 10 sizing, and you can go up depending on your needs. So you can do 10 by 20, 10 by 30, 20 by 20, that kind of thing. And it's usually in a separate area than Artist Alley is. So sometimes it's a separate room, sometimes it's the other half of the room, sometimes it's on a completely different floor. So depending on where it's located, it could have better or worse traffic than Artist Alley. But usually the idea of Exhibitor Hall is to cater to bigger brands that need more room, can pay more for the room, and just are more established or need like a lot of load in because they're doing huge build outs, that kind of thing. But definitely doesn't mean that smaller artists like myself cannot be in Exhibitor Hall. They're usually very open about who is allowed to be there. As a result, they have a lot less regulations. The only regulations I've seen are maybe like build height, how tall you're allowed to go. But even that, you can usually get permission to overrule that as long as you submit your plan ahead of time. They definitely don't have regulations on the actual maker having to be there. So in Exhibit Hall, you might see a lot more resellers, proxy sellers, but on the downside is usually a lot more expensive than Artist Alley. So I'm seeing 2 to 3 times more, around 500 as a starting price to all the way up to 5,000 for a 10 by 10 space. But let's get into the important part, how to actually get into Artist Alley. So I'm going to start with Artist Alley because it's definitely a much beginner friendly place to start. So honestly, it was one of my biggest hurdles trying to get in, trying to get my head wrapped around when applications open, what kind of applications are there, and how to actually search for conventions. So I'm going to start with the first one is how to find conventions you want to get to that is good for your product and what you're selling essentially. So first thing to consider is what type of conventions are out there. So I usually do anime and Comic-Con conventions, so a lot of my content is focused on that, but I will go through a few other ones in case you're interested in those. Anime conventions are the first and foremost. They are becoming more popular recently. They focus on anime, pop culture, and as you suspect, the focus is primarily anime. Comic-Con, similarly, are focused on comics. Think of Marvel, DC, independent publishers, and they also attract collectors, limited edition stuff. Other ones you might find yourself coming across are animal-themed ones, so CorgiCon, ShibaCon, anything that focuses on a particular group of animal or a particular species of animal. Cultural cons like K-pop theme ones are popular nowadays, Japanese theme. These cons usually have a more market vibe though, but still fun to go if you have one in the area. Gamer cons are stuff like board games, like Gen Con or Level Up Expo is also one of them. Other specialty ones are maybe sci-fi fantasy, horror, streaming specific one like TwitchCon, BronyCon, and other in that similar vibe. If you are a con goer yourself and you want to list a few in the comments below, feel free. We would love to see what kind of cons you go to. The second thing to consider usually is whether you are traveling to a con or staying local to somewhere you can drive to. So the issue with travel cons is, first of all, you have to figure out how to bring all your stuff there. So if you see some of my content, I'm trying to shove all my booth stuff inside of 2 suitcases, which is free with Southwest, which is why a lot of con goers love flying Southwest. Aside from that, you also have to think of the cost, the overhead of things like hotel, flights, gas, Uber, food even, parking. Well, parking is less of a thing because you're not driving there. But in case you rent a car, parking. Local shows are usually the way to go because they have less costs and less things to think about, like flights and stuff like that. But if you are in an area that doesn't have a lot of big cons locally or just not a lot of events in your local area, you might have to consider traveling to cons. The next step is how to vet cons to make sure you are going to the right ones that are worth your time and effort. I think the first thing, mostly for beginners, to do is to join a specialized group that has a lot of this information already available in the forums. So one example is Annie, short for Artist Alley Network International, and it's a really good channel. They're on Discord. They have a lot of history of people going to cons and sharing their experiences at certain cons. So you can just look up the con to see what have people talking about. Did people do well? Did people not do well? Or Facebook groups similarly are a good way to go. I'm in the one, We Are Vendors and Entrepreneurs. That one always has good information about the exhibitor side of things, but also helpful if you want to know if certain cons are good. Artist Alley Friends are also a good one. And these all have very good sources of information, not only of how well people have been doing, but also some caveats about the con, maybe location, was it easier to load in, that kind of thing. I think another good thing to note is when you're vetting a con, if at all possible, to go yourself first. So I always encourage this for anything, markets, cons, just anything you want to vend at, to go walk the con yourself to get a feel of not only the vibes, the audience, but also the traffic flow, like which booths are better if you are given the chance to select booths. Are corner booths even worth it? Because sometimes they let you opt into buying corners over inland booths for a little more. So just to get a sense of how the con looks. And not only that, but when you're there, you can also connect with vendors that have been vending there to get a sense of how they like it. Some vendors are not very upfront about like their experiences there, but others will be. So just ask everyone and be very respectful of their time, making sure you're not in the way of any potential buyers. And maybe if they are busy, to just get their information, ask if you can ask them about the con after the fact, maybe on Instagram or via email. So that's always a good way to start. I personally am always open to people emailing me about certain cons. So if you do have questions and you see that I've been there in a video of one of my vlogs, then feel free to email me as well, and I'll try to answer as much as I can. And then one last good way to see and vet shows is to watch vlogs of them. So I have a few myself, and I'll probably link the actual playlist for you somewhere below and in the top. But vlogs definitely are a growing popularity, and they give a lot of information about the actual cons they're going to from the artist's perspective. And usually some of them will go through how they feel about the con, if it's worth going back, and some will actually share numbers for you if you're interested in that. All right, we finally narrowed down to the few cons that you want to go into, or your dream cons, just a list that you've been creating. Let's talk about how to actually get in and apply. So application styles do vary from con to con, but these are generally the popular ones that they use. First come, first serve is as it sounds. You submit the application in a time frame, and whoever submits it first gets the spot. Sometimes it's by application timestamp, sometimes it's by payment timestamp, and sometimes they throw you for a loop where you have to like sign it and then people trip out, or you have to fill in your credit cards and people have their credit cards ready. Autofill is very powerful for these. Having a good internet connection is very powerful for these. The second type that is very popular and growing in popularity is juried. So they look at every single application and they score them based off an internal scoring rubric and accept the top X number of people. So most time there is an open application timeline. So they might open application slots for 1 week or even down to a few hours. For these, definitely check when it opens and how long. And they usually require you to have a portfolio ready. A portfolio could be a link to your DeviantArt, a link to a very specific portfolio page, which is just what I have. Think of it as like applying for a studio art job or applying for a job in general. You really want your portfolio to show the best of your work and also give a sense of what you sell, because if you have a portfolio that doesn't represent what you sell, you might get in a little bit of trouble when you go and end up selling something different. So keep that in mind and definitely get your portfolio ready for juried events. The third one is lotteries. So as it sounds, there is also usually an open application duration time. They open for like a week and they get however many people apply and they randomize the selection process. Some people like this more because it's more fair, but other people just like the jury process. Kind of just depends. Then there are a few that have started mixing the processes. So one example is first come, first served juried. So how this works is they have a time slot, it's open, and it is kind of speed based. They will jury every single application that comes in up to a certain point. So let's say they have 100 positions, or let's say they have 100 tables open, and they'll just start jurying whichever application comes first, and maybe they require people to hit like a score of 60 in their rubric. Whoever hits that score gets in automatically until the spots are filled. So it's kind of first come, first served, but it's also juried. So that's one thing I've heard about. Another thing I've seen happen is when they split the artist alley into different types of application processes. So Otakon is a very good example of it. I think Stack Anime also did it historically at some point. I'm not sure if they're still doing it like that. But one way they've been doing it is, let's say like 50% of Artist Alley will be juried and the other 50% will be lottery based. So that's one example. And sometimes they allow you to apply for both. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes things overlap. So just double check and really read their rules on how the application process works. Otakon, for example, has not only a jury selection, but they also have a first come, first served selection and a lottery section. So they have all three, and they actually allow you to apply for every single section. So you have a chance of getting into any of them, and you can choose which one you want if you get into two. I really like their system, but it definitely is more work on the organizer's part of things. So the second issue we have to figure out is when this application process happens for the con you want to get into. So this does vary from con to con, and it varies from year to year as well, so it makes it even harder. But I say the best way to do it is to utilize those groups I was talking about. So Annie, Artist Alley Friends, vendor and entrepreneur Facebook groups. Those all will have histories of when the last year's application open. And usually for cons, they stick around the same schedule. And not only will you find out like when last year's happened, but you'll also find out what type of application process they used last year to give you a leg up on what you should expect for this year. Some groups like Annie will also post when applications go live, which is super, super helpful. So they'll actually have a dedicated channel for people to post like, hey, this con's application just went live. But I also think a good habit to get into is to double check the applications for all the cons you want to get into at the start of every month. So I like to do a general check maybe like a dedicated month date, like the first of every month, for example, and just work it into your routine to double check, oh, did they announce when applications are going to open? Because usually they give you the date of the application opening before the actual date. So it's always good to check. And I personally use Airtable to keep all that information organized. And if you're curious of how I use Airtable, I'll link in the corner of a quick video of how I use Airtable for my business. If you're interested in me diving deeper into that topic, let me know in the comments below. Now, a very important topic that I want to go into is what if you don't get in? Let's say you did the application process. For some reason, you were not chosen in the lottery, or you did not get into the jury, or you're just not quick enough for the first come, first serve. Is there other ways to get in? And I'm going to say yes. There's actually 2 more chances for you to get a spot, even if you did not get in the first round. The first is waitlists. A lot of artist alleys do have waitlists for in case people drop out of the show, and they will start pulling from waitlists from maybe weeks after the application all the way up to maybe a few weeks before the con starts. So the wait list works usually in the way where you automatically get on. Let's say you submitted your application, you didn't get in. They'll usually inform you that, hey, you're on the wait list. Sometimes they'll actually inform you if you're not on the wait list. So for example, some juried events, they will only take the first maybe like 200 people onto the wait list. So they'll accept, and it's going to be based on scores similar to the application process. So let's say the first 100 people got into the con, and then the second 200 people gets in onto the wait list. So that is something they do, but they'll usually tell you if they are doing that. Some cons actually require you to submit yourself onto the wait list after the application process is completely over, so double check if that is a thing. I think one example is SAC Anime required us to resubmit ourselves for their waitlist, and that was first come first serve, and they do cap it at a certain amount of people. So just make sure to double check that you did get on the waitlist, considering they do have different ways of getting people on the waitlist. And some organizers will let you know when the last day of waitlist notification is. So I forgot which one recently mentioned it. They'll say something like, we'll inform all waitlisters by this given day to let you know if you are in the con or not. Which leads us to your last opportunity to get in, which is the day of the show. So usually there are some spots that open up the day of the event. Maybe someone just couldn't get there last minute, maybe flights got delayed, or someone got sick. That can all be a possibility of why tables open up in artist alley. So every con does this a little differently. Usually what does happen is they will allow people to come maybe the first or second day, and these people can request for open spots. Sometimes you actually have to give them the exact booth number that you want. You might have to walk around the con to see which booths are still open and make it have a list for them of which ones you would like. Others, they're more organized in the way they give out last minute spots where they write down everybody that is there, maybe like end of first day, and they might do a lottery or first come first serve, or they might go by original position you are on the wait list. But there is usually always a last minute opportunity for either the end of first day or around the second day. And the last bit is other ways to secure a spot. So one alternate way of securing a spot is table sharing. So not all cons or all artist alleys allow this, but some actually do. So some examples of table sharing I've seen, Anime Expo, Otakon, TwitchCon, I've done it at SakuraCon. So more than people expect, I think. And usually how we do it is if one of us out of our friends get in, they don't want for some reason to have the full table room, or they just want to go with someone, they might open it to table sharing, or you can just ask if you are familiar with the person who got the table. Definitely don't ask like a stranger. That's usually not very respectful, but if you know the person and you are familiar with them and you're willing to share and they're willing to share, then definitely a great option. And the second way of securing a spot if you don't get into Artist Alley is to think about Exhibitor Hall, which gets us into the next section of how to get an exhibitor space. For most events, it's actually way less complicated to get into Exhibitor Hall than Artist Alley, just because the entry price for Exhibitor Hall spaces is so much more. So like I mentioned, it's around 500 all the way up to 5,000 for perhaps a 10 by 10 space. So most conventions do have an application process. You have to submit an application either in a form style or ask the organizer or the exhibitor at Comic-Con, whatever, email to link you to their application or to attach their application to you. And all you have to do is fill in the application. You usually answer things like what you're selling, what kind of booth space you want, and then they'll usually give you the price of the booth. So for a lot of events and cons, because it is so expensive, they don't have all their spaces filled right away. So it's almost easier to get in just because there's a lot of openings every year, and they actually are usually looking for people to fill the space. This is not for every con though. So those are one type of con. So for example, TwitchCon for exhibitors is pretty easy to get into. But on the other side, there are a few cons that are really hard to get into, even for exhibitors. So some examples are Anime Expo and Fanime. They have year-long waitlists. I was on the waitlist for Fanime for exhibitor for I think 5 years, and I think the only reason I got in was a lot of people opted out of attending during the COVID years. So I got in right after regulations were lifted. So yeah, let's talk about cons with waitlists for Exhibitor Hall and how those work and how you submit yourself onto the waitlist. So similarly, if they do have a waitlist, usually they will give you the same application and you'll fill out the same way, and they'll just put you on the wait list right after getting your application. But the issue is with some events like San Diego Comic-Con, you do have to fill out the application every single year to maintain your spot on the wait list. Now, this is very important, mostly for big shows like San Diego Comic-Con, where there's a lot of people wanting to get into the exhibit hall, and the wait list can usually be like 10 years long. Yes, 10 years long. You have to reapply every single year, or you get bumped all the way to the end. So let's say you've been waiting for 6 years to get into San Diego Comic-Con, and you forget 1 year to submit your application. You are now at year 1 again. So definitely do not forget for events like that to submit your con every year. And if you are not sure if the con is requiring you to submit it every year, I honestly would check in with them every year. So for events like Fanime and SakuraCon, that's definitely what I did before I was able to get in. I checked in every year just to see how things are going, just to see, hey, this is my updated application, that kind of thing. And sometimes the reason I do that is because either the organizers change or the way they accept applications might change as well. So I know San Diego Comic-Con has changed the way they accept applications once or twice throughout the years. So that's one example of something that could happen. In cases like these, I do think persistent pays off. You are top of the mind. If they need last minute fill-ins, that could be a leg up because you checked in every year. Speaking of last minute fill-ins, same way as in Artist Alley, you can actually get booths the day of the event or the second day of the event specifically. So what I usually do if I'm really, really interested in an event is I will prepare all my stuff and be ready to go like the day of the event. So let's say I want to get into a show like Fanime or San Diego Comic-Con. I will have everything packed and ready to go, and I'll usually either go myself, or if it's like a show like San Diego Comic-Con where you can't go yourself, ask someone who is going to double check the spaces that are available there and to give you a list of spaces, or to check yourself a list of spaces that are open. And once you have the numbers of the booth spaces that are open and doesn't seem to have people there maybe second day of the show, then go to the organizer. Usually I like to show up instead of email, but email first, call second, and maybe show up third if that's the way you want to do it. I usually like to show up regardless and just be like, hey, I am ready to go with all my stuff. If you have a booth space available, I am interested in it. I can pay right away. So it does seem a little excessive, but the reason we do this, and this is a very important factor in Exhibitor Hall that is very, very different from Artist Alley, is that Artist Alley, you have to get in every year. But for a lot of exhibitor halls, once you get in, you're basically in for however many years you want to be in. What I mean is, let's say I get into San Diego Comic-Con this year, you automatically get in for next year. And this is why events that have waitlists, you can wait so long on the waitlist because everybody is guaranteed a spot the next year if they want it. And the only way they pull people off the waitlist is if someone, for whatever reason, does not want to go the next year. And if it's a really good show, that usually will not happen unless their business has closed. So one great thing about the last minute booth is that not only do you get a booth last minute, it's totally fine if you only sell for like one day, for example, but think about the potential of being allowed to come back every year after that. But I still have to put a warning in. Like I did mention that you are almost guaranteed a booth next year. You have one this year. This is not 100% guarantee. And I do have to kind of put a disclaimer out there because definitely for the bigger shows, if they change the layout of the booths, for example, or the amount of booths there are. One example was Anime Expo this year. I don't think everybody that wanted to get in as an exhibitor that was there last year got in this year. And that was because they actually changed the layout a little bit of the exhibitor hall this year. So they allowed more bigger booths that pushed out a few of the smaller booths. So it does help you get a leg up of getting in next year, but it's not guaranteed. And similar to Artist Alley, there's also the shared booth way of getting in. So let's say your friend has a 10 by 10 booth and they are willing to either share their 10 by 10 or expand to a 10 by 20 and give you the second 10 by 10. This is definitely another way you can get into either any exhibitor hall or hard to get into exhibitor halls, or even if you just feel like you and your friend feel like exhibitor hall is too expensive and you don't actually need a 10 by 10 space, you can actually share with another individual to kind of offset that cost. Now, I do want to put a word of caution that not all exhibitor halls and not all conventions do allow this. So as always, double check with the organizers and make sure it is okay to do that. But from my experiences, a surprising amount of conventions do allow this. And again, this is very important because let's say you do share with a friend. Let's say your friend gets into an exhibitor hall, maybe like Anime Expo. I'm not sure if Anime Expo allows it. Let's say Fanime. Let's say they got an exhibitor space at Fanime and they were willing to expand their exhibitor space to 10 by 20 and they give you the second 10 by 10. You can actually sign up for next year's exhibitor hall without going through the waitlist. Now, this is not for every single con, and sometimes cons like Fanime will change their regulations for it, but they are more likely to allow you to do that than not. So now that we figured out how to get into not only Artist Alley, but also exhibitor hall, I'm gonna give a little final statements at the end and a few disclaimers for everybody here. I want to mention that rejection is actually really, really common for getting into shows, getting into conventions, Artist Alley or exhibitor. It is very, very common. I think for Artist Alley more so because usually there's less booth spaces for Artist Alley, but more people wanting to get in. And the reason is, or the reality is, the Artist Alley scene has become extremely oversaturated now. And it's like, for some people, they say it's a bad thing. For some people, it's a good thing to see like all these artists being able to do what they love. But just as a perspective, I want you to keep this in your mind. I've heard from organizers that they've gotten 5,000 applicants for a mere 100 spaces. These are the ratios you are fighting against. And every year, I feel like it gets worse and worse. And I want you to keep this in mind because 4,900 people were rejected and only 100 people got the spaces. So it's actually more common to get rejected. And I think in cases like these, persistence is key. I did share a few other ways to get in, like the last minute spots and the waitlisting. I think those are very important ways to utilize, because mostly now, when not everybody knows about them. You know, everybody knows about the application process, but not a lot of people know about the last minute spaces. So if you are serious about this and if you really want to get in, these are the ways that you should utilize. And then on the note of juried events, it's also same ratio. It might feel more personal than maybe a lottery or first come, first serve. You might be thinking like, oh, why didn't I get in and this person got in? But it could be so many numbers of reasons. And I want you to keep that in mind too, and not be dejected if you are rejected, because as I said, there's so many people applying. You also don't really know what they're looking for. So I've heard from multiple like juried events that it could be a certain style they're looking for, a certain type of product. Maybe one product type is too saturated even. That could be a contributing factor. They could be looking at a certain follower number. If you have more followers, that could be helpful. They could be prioritizing returning vendors. You never really know what their criteria is unless they do share it, which is very rare that they share their rubric system. But I do want to mention this because it's not sometimes tied to the quality of your work or the value of your work. You know, like if you don't get in for whatever your reason, like this does not define you, and is what I want to share. Like even me, who I've been doing it for since 2017, and I can literally be rich from all the jury events that I didn't get into. And it's okay because I'm still running a relatively successful business. So that definitely does not define the potential that your business can reach. And as a final note, I do want to mention that if you're looking at selling at conventions, they're definitely not the only markets available out there. I do encourage everybody to look at local markets as well. Things like night markets, festivals, even farmers markets could be a great opportunity as well. So they're also easier to apply for. Less people tend to go to them. So if you're looking for something to fill out your event calendar, those are all great options as well. And I do have a few videos of some markets that I went to, kind of like cherry blossom festivals, night markets, that kind of thing. So I really hope this did help someone out there. If it did help you, let me know in the comments below. And for those who've been following on for a while, you'll see that my setup has changed. Definitely let me know if you like it better. I have a new mic and have new lights, and I have a new background. So excited to start making more content like this in the future as well. If you like our content, as usual, like, subscribe, and click the alert bell. It does help my channel grow. And if you are looking for more content, I will put the playlist for all of my vlogs. I have some market vlogs and convention vlogs if you're interested in this section of the video. Go check that out. Thanks for watching. See you there.